Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're thrilled to welcome back SAP as our conference sponsor, and I'm pleased to introduce their panel, The Inflection Point in Sports, how analytics and big data is changing the game. Joining us today, we have Frank Wheeler from SAP. We have Mary Jo Fernandez from the Women's Tennis Association. We have Ashish Kinra from the Washington Redskins. We have Oscar Fernandez from the MLB and Ken DeGeneiro from the NBA. Please welcome our panelists.
Thank you, Simon. So good morning, everybody. Glad you guys have your lunch, so we're not in between your lunch, so I'm glad you guys are eating now. Thank you for joining us. We think we've got a really good panel here today. We're really pleased to have 4 customers of SAP with us to talk about analytics and how they're managing big data and how technology is changing the game in their sport. And we've got great representation both at a league level and across 4 different sports of basketball, baseball, football, and tennis. To my left is the VP of IT, Ken DeGeneiro. We've got the Director of Application Development and Business Intelligence for Major League Baseball, and Oscar, VP of IT for the Washington Redskins. And you all know Mary Jo, former professional tennis player and analyst, and 2-time Olympic gold medalist, by the way, with the Women's Tennis Association. So we're going to try to make this as interactive as possible. We've got a number of questions. Each one of the panelists will give you some insights into the tools and the solutions that they're currently using within their organization. And then if there's any time at the end, we can certainly answer questions. My name is Frank Wheeler. I've been with SAP for about 8 years, and this is the second time that we're presenting here at the MIT Sloan Summit. And we've got a booth right outside this room, so if you have any questions about the solutions that the customers are using that they're going to demonstrate today, feel free to stop by our booth after the event. So let's get right into it. So Ashish, why don't we start with you and let's talk about the process of scouting. When a football team is looking at the large quantity of data that you have on either a player prospect coming from college or if you're looking for trades from professional ranks, you've got a lot of data to manage, and the scouting process, I think, is a very complex one. What are some of the features and some of the things that you're looking for within a tool within scouting that would help you make that process as most efficiently as possible? Maybe you can talk a little bit about how the Redskins manage that.
Sure. So some of the key requirements we were looking for in our scouting system was real-time information. So the road scouts can write their reports, and back at the headquarters, executives can look at it right away and decide based on our coaching philosophy where they want to rank that player. Additionally, we wanted to make sure that that the scouts can actually access it all the time, 24/7. So when they're in the morning, 6 in the morning, writing their reports, or late at night, 10 in the evening, they're constantly on the system writing reports. In addition to that, we wanted to make sure it was intuitive. So any coach, any scout, any football mind can log into the system and within 3 to 5 clicks get the answer they're looking for. So that was some of the key requirements we're looking for.
And talk to a little bit. We've got a sample screenshot here of the tool that you guys are using, SAP Scouting. This isn't the Redskins screenshot. This is a generic screenshot for our solution. But talk a little bit about some of the features that you have here and how you're managing the data.
Sure. And as you can see, right there is a great snapshot of a full view of a player. Right there, you can see all their measurables: height, weight, speed, 40 time, and then ability reports, which are what the scouts are actually grading them. Based on how we want to rank the player, and then what other players are they similar to in pro that you can compare with that other coaches have used in the past, or in college, how are you seeing that the player is going to transition to become a pro prospect? So right there's a great visual.
So it's good to know who similar players are, so that if you're looking at a particular person and then he's not available at the time you're drafting, then you've got a list of people that are close to that player.
Hey, exactly. We can't get this guy. Let's go after somebody similar that's going to fit our need.
That's great.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. We'll come back to scouting in a little while. Oscar, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, happy to.
Major League Baseball, certainly no stranger to data and statistics. And with, I know you're tracking within Major League Baseball at the league office, the history of the game going back to the 1800s. Talk to us a little bit about internally within MLB and at the teams as well. How are you managing the quantities of data that you are? And what are some of the visualized tools that you're using to make sense of it all, right? To visualize it and to really make sense and get some insight out of it. Can you share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. And I guess that was, one of our early challenges was to bring all with us. We're data rich in our world, in our sport. And so it's bringing that all together so that we could have a holistic view of the player. Whether, and that be from their, sunrise of their career to the sunset of their career.
Yeah.
Starting all the way from scouting through the minor leagues, and not just looking at, the major leagues, and not just looking at statistics, but looking at, their whole entire view. So their profile, their biographical information, their contract information, signing bonuses, award bonuses, transactions that happen with them and other players, putting it all together in one big view, and then making that accessible to the league and the clubs to be able to do their analysis. And first, it was purpose-built to support a process, for our baseball arbitration, which actually just wrapped up. And then it started to grow and flourish because we started bringing in external data sources. We started bringing in news feeds. We started bringing in video. And on top of that, that's where the analytics started to grow in looking at data visualizations and dashboards of the data and looking forth, what else could this data tell us?
So let's take a look at some of the things that are being used, the PIA system. Why don't you talk about
Yeah,
PIA?
the player information application system, which actually there's 3 or 4 folks out here who are at the Sloan Conference who are ex-students who interned, and they use this system. So it's interesting to see them in the crowd. But this is the similar to a home plate, home profile for a player. You see it's a little bit of an eye chart because there just is so much information. But here, in 1 or 2 clicks, you can see their latest contract, you can see the latest stats, you can see what's been their award history, and you can drill into any of that, and even all the way down to the game log, to the pitch by pitch, to video that's associated with a certain at bat, all in one place.
And it's league office and team offices both use this, correct?
Yeah, both
Right.
use it, and it's open and available to everyone, and it's highly customizable, and they can change what they see. So you can have your own views of things.
Right. So talk to us about the Comp Finder one.
Sure. So similar to what Ashish had mentioned on the scouting side, looking at all this data and trying to find similar players. So Comp Finder here was trying to find, not just looking at statistics, but on salary and weighting things for, a relief pitcher. There's certain stats that make more sense than for a starting pitcher. Or, looking on the offensive side, looking at someone who's more of a speed profile versus someone who's a power hitting profile. And this tool will help you and score those players using all those statistics and algorithms to figure out who's the most like this player. So you can move on to I think there's the next slide, is taking this a bit further, and we're continuing to add data and now taking it to the injury side.
Right.
And adding injury analytics data. And here we leverage the Explorer tool that SAP has to create this easy guided navigation tool where we're bringing in injury data, de-identified, across the whole league. So we're presenting this to trainers so they can see what the trends are in injuries, not just on their team and their injuries that they're seeing, but across the whole league. And be able to slice and dice the data with 1 or 2 clicks to then get something that shows them a trend of maybe something they need to pay attention to.
Sure. That's great. That's great. Okay. And then PitchFX?
Now, PitchFX is, again, taking this data that we've collected, the granular data where you have for every pitch that's thrown, and trying to create a dashboard or visualization of that so that the front office and folks throughout the organization can use it and to look back, really. It's not just what happened yesterday, what happened in the game, but it's let me look in across the entire career. And here we see Ryan Howard versus Edwin Jackson, for a certain year, and seeing what was the pitch places, what type of pitches did he like to throw by type and whatnot. And this is really being utilized in different ways than we even first.
Players and coaches using this as well?
Yeah, they're
primarily to look at trends on matchups from previous games?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So this is an example of Edwin Jackson against Ryan Howard. So the pitchers, this is from a previous at-bat for them? Is that how it?
This would be for a whole season.
Whole season, okay.
For a whole season against that batter.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. All right, great. Excellent. All right, let's switch gears and move to tennis. Mary Jo, welcome. Thanks for
Thank you.
joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I know that tennis is now starting to go through a transformation in use of technology. The folks have probably seen, if they've watched matches before, some of the technology used by Hawkeye. But let's talk a little bit about analytics and how some of the newer advances in analytics is changing the game, not only for fans and watching the game and players and coaches, but even yourself as a broadcaster and analyst. How are you using the new visualization tools to tell that story about the game?
That's exactly right. It's not just for the players and coaches, but the fans are going to be more engaged. And for me now as a broadcaster, I'm able to tell a deeper story, a little bit more meaningful, answer questions of why things are happening. In the past, we would have stats and we'd have the basic ones, first serve percentage, errors, unforced errors, forced ones, but it was tough to see when they were happening. And a little bit of what Oscar was saying is, for me, the most important thing in tennis now is that you can track point-by-point analysis. SAP is providing the analytics now for a whole season, a whole year. And when you look at this slide that we're showing here from Serena Williams, her serve direction, she's got the best serve in the women's game. But now when you start to look at her pattern, she actually is very predictable on the deuce court. On the right side of the court, if you look at the blue tennis balls, those are her second serves, you can see the majority are going to the backhand of a righty. There's only one little blue ball there on the right side. Players are starting to figure this out now. All the coaches of the top players, whether it's Maria Sharapova, Victoria Azarenka, Li Na, they're asking for samples of patterns like this. Having said that, no one's beating Serena that frequently, but the margins in all our sports are very, very minimal. So if you get this 2 or 3%, a little bit of an extra edge where you know which way a serve is going from one of the best servers in the game, it could make a difference down the road. So as a player, I wish I had these analytics to be able to track patterns and plays. I think now for the coaches, it's phenomenal because it's doing a lot of the work for them, and they're being able to track opponents. Before you'd see one match, and I remember my coaches coming to me and saying, listen, you're playing someone who plays a lot to the backhand. And I'd be like, okay, I'll watch for that. Or their backhand's a little bit weaker. But really, they went on just watching 1 or 2 matches. Now you can look at a whole season and say, you know what, this is a pattern for Victoria Azarenka.
And it's probably easier for a player to understand that coaching if they had a visualization of something, where if they didn't, then it would become just one other point that the coach is making to a player, but to really showcase something. Like, let's look at the next slide, because I think this is a great one on the heat map for where the Istanbul match with Serena Williams. Why don't you talk to this?
I love this visual.
One.
This is a fantastic visual, the heat map. It looks a little bit like an amoeba, but you can tell where the red is highlighted. That is where a player spends most of their time during a match. And this was during the championships in Istanbul at the end of last year, where Serena Williams played against Li Na in the final. And you can see she's usually pretty close to that baseline. She's not deviating too much whenever she can, but she gets moved around, and the blue is where she rarely goes. She doesn't come up to net that often, but she's controlling the center of the court. Sometimes you'll see a different player who has a big forehand. They'll play a lot from the left, and that's where the red will be marked. But for Serena, she really is in the middle, and she's the one dictating. She's not doing a lot of the defending. She's usually doing a lot of the offensive play. Yeah.
No, this is a great visual. I've seen this as well, where you've got matchups against both players having a heat map. I've seen Andy Roddick and Roger Federer. And when Roddick played Federer and won, his heat zone, the red area, was much closer to the net. And when he had lost, he was on his heel. So it was behind the baseline a couple of feet. So it really just, the visualization just really does a great job of telling the story.
And it proves to the player, because as a player, we get very stubborn, and we think we know it all, and we don't really sense what's happening sometimes during a match. So if you can visually provide something like this and say, look, this is why, and this is happening, then the player says, okay, I believe you.
Yeah, exactly. Great, thanks. Let's go to the NBA. So certainly no stranger to statistics and data and numbers. Last year, around this time, you announced the new NBA stats, powered by SAP. And Ken, being the VP, you're the guy that was the responsible for the release of that. So one of my favorite websites to go to if I miss a game, to go back and look at the statistics. Tell us a little bit about the stats and some of the success that you've had and the things that you're using that website for, Ken.
Sure. So our story actually dates back a year prior to that. We had launched a system similar to what Oscar described, and Ashish as well, where our teams and our media, we made something available to them that had all of this information. It was very utilitarian in design. It was something that gave you the raw numbers, but it wasn't exactly what we could put out via scale or design to our fans. When Commissioner David Stern at the time and now Commissioner Adam Silver saw it, said, this is wonderful, great achievement, let's make it available to the fans.
Right.
And that started a 12-month process on finding the right technology, bringing the right designs, and eventually launching at last year's All-Star Game.
And a system that can support tens of thousands of users at the same time?
Right. The scale was what was causing us issue. The number of concurrent queries that we were going to have to support for across all of our different 4.5 quadrillion different segments of data that we had done that analysis and determined it was that many. So you couldn't pre-cache, you couldn't pre-compute. We had to have all that available to be computed in real time by a system. And when you're serving a fan, the data has to be immediately available. Otherwise, you'll lose that fan to the competition.
So let's go to the stats. Here, let me just jump back here. Sorry. Ken, why don't you take us through the NBA stats page and show us a little bit about what you have here?
Sure. So we cover, we have a staff of editorial people actually scouring all the information and putting together different statistical profiles on players and covering it editorially, adding some context. Then we came up with what we felt was a really visual display of using our player silhouettes, as well as some graphs that compare a number of statistics against the league average, so you can see how, although Durant leads the league in scoring, you can see he overweights in all of the 5 categories that we've put there on the top of the page. If you scroll down, the other thing that we've recently introduced is our player tracking system, right? So there's a lot of presentations on that. I won't get too deep into that, but we're capturing the XY movement on all of the players, and what we're doing now is making that data available to the fans right here on NBA.com stats. Of course, like we saw for WTA, we've got our heat maps and our shot charts for all of the different players, and not just at the season level or at the game level, but any of the situations or any of the segments that you can make available from within the system. Any of those 4.5 quadrillion different statistics that tie back to shooting, we can bring that in. And then we had launched last year every box score in NBA history. We had never really launched that to the fans, that compilation of all the different stats.
Right.
And then earlier to start this year, what we did was we were able to take our digital media library, align it with the stats, make it available to the fans. So if you go any one of the statistics you see highlighted, you could either see the shot chart, but you could also see the video view of that as well. So as the time of this slide was taken, Durant led the league in shooting with 583 makes, those field goal makes. If you go to the next one, you can actually bring that up right on the site, on the public site, and see all 583 makes if you wanted to do that.
So every shot
of every game last year and this year available on the site.
That's
for
terrific.
fans. Yes. Yep.
Yeah, and I love the features that you have within stats on doing player comparisons. So looking at a player over a regular season or playoffs, and some of the things that you've done with the statistics that you have. If you can go to the slide again, guys. Here where you see in the middle where you've got points, rebounds, assists, the typical box score stuff, but some other things that you have like efficiency and clutch, which are some of the other really neat stats to track. We've got a guy at SAP that's not a big fan of Kobe Bryant's, and there's some other players that are out there. He likes to look at the clutch numbers for Kobe Bryant and comparing him to other players. But it's really some interesting stuff on getting into and answering those questions about, hey, who really is a better player? Is Kobe better than Durant or whatever? So some really, really interesting insight there. That's great. Let's move back over to Oscar and MLB. So, the PIA system, something that you guys have had running now for a couple of years. What's next? Where do you see this technology and analytics going for MLB?
Yeah, so there's a few different areas where I think our focus is going to be. One is around big data, and there's even a plethora of analytics, and the folks here have talked about it around tracking movement across the entire playing field. and bringing that data in and analyzing data on that. So we talked about pitch FX and hit FX, but there's field FX, and that's, how do you figure out who really is the best center fielder out there? Well, we have our partners over at Advanced Media, and they're tracking the movement of that player to the ball and the trajectory and everyone's position on the ball as the entire play happens. Bringing that in and doing analysis of that, that's our next frontier for us. And then marrying that with video and allowing users to be able to do that on their own. And that's the other trend, which is putting tools into the end user's hands and the analyst's hands, especially advanced visualization tools. That's where we're going to put our focus, because they're the ones who are going to come up with the next analytic versus looking at technology. So having open technology that they can use to mash up data from other data sources. Maybe it's things that they create. Maybe it's a new statistic that someone's coming up with right there in the front office, and that's their secret sauce, and enabling them with the tools. So those are the two initial areas. And the third area, which I think obviously has been the trend for several years, is mobility and putting that into the user's hands on the field. So you'll see an example here of taking PIA and putting it on an iPad and creating a native iOS iPad app that's easy to use and usable, and something that front office folk could be in the stands, they could be talking about a player and then bring up all the relevant information on that player to make real-time decisions. Yeah.
Very impressive. That's great. Mary Jo, let's talk about tennis for a second. So we showed a little bit of the visualized tools and analytics. As you go further into the game and understanding some of the nuances, as a broadcaster, you really want to try to tell those stories to the fans. And I think a picture sometimes tells it's 1,000 words, right? But some of the new tools that are out there, you mentioned you wish you really had this back when you were playing. It would have been great. But here's some examples of some of the things that are being showcased. Why don't we talk through a couple of these slides?
Sure. I mean, this is something that we were talking about before, where you dig a little deeper. You go a little bit more into detail about what happens when a player is serving on a break point. So here at 30-40, you have 4 of the top players in the world. Do they get their first serve in? Well, you're looking at Azarenka, who actually only got it 20% of the time in. The serve is Azarenka's weakest part. So if you know that you're going to have a chance to break, and gives the opponent, whoever it might be, a little bit more belief when they're playing even someone like a Victoria Azarenka. But then you see Li Na and Serena, the top 2 players right now. Serena's been dominating the last couple of years. They're getting 75% of their first serves in on the big moments. Angelique Kerber, the German lefty, doesn't have a big, powerful serve, but when she's down break point, half the time she's getting it in. She's vulnerable. But you'll see why the best players do well is on these key moments, how they deliver. And Serena's been able to deliver time and time again, particularly on her serve.
We talked earlier, you said they still need to execute.
That's the thing. I mean, even though now Sharapova knows about the page we saw before, that she serves a lot to the backhand on second serves, you still have to be able to do something with it and execute the shot and execute the point. But I find it very interesting that the coaches are so intrigued, and that players like a Serena Williams that are so much better at when they're at their best, that they're dominating, that they want to know these patterns and strategies, that they know that extra 2 to 5% can make a difference for them. So Li Na, Sharapova, all these players that have done a lot of winning, they're saying, you know what, let me get that extra edge. Let me know a little bit more, just in case in a match we get to this 30-40 point, we get to an important juncture, that I'll know a little bit of the tendencies that might happen.
Yeah, and that competitive advantage is huge for them. And what's interesting is the coaches of these players, the top players in the world, are thirsty for more information. They're constantly coming back and asking for more insights. Not just the players that are trying to rise up the ranks, which is really neat. We've seen this slide before, and I've showed this slide in other presentations to customers. And the next question that gets asked is, hey, how hard are these guys really? How hard are these guys hitting this ball? So the next slide is a really good one to talk about the speed of their services. Why don't we move to the next slide if we can?
Well,
so here's some interesting stats here.
We know the Williams sisters in the last decade, they've had the most powerful serves. And you'll see it's in kilometers, because this was taken from Istanbul, the WTA championships, where they calculate in kilometers. But Serena has the fastest serve on the tour right now, but she averages about 170 kilometers, which I think is about 102 miles an hour. First serve, and then her second serve is down to 140, which is in the mid-80s. Li Na has a little bit of a faster average on the second serve, but it's a little bit more vulnerable because it doesn't have a lot of margin, it doesn't have a lot of spin. Serena's big advantage is it's very hard to attack her second serve. As Azarenka, she's under 100 miles an hour on that first serve. Her second serve drops down. Like I said earlier, that's her weakest part. That's what she's working on. It's not a very fluid motion, so when she's struggling a little bit with nerves, you'll see that that's the shot that gets attacked the most. And Yankovic is someone who's been #1 in the world. She's been in finals at the US Open. She's on the rise again. She's a very consistent player, and the one area she's really worked on is her serve. She's getting a faster average now for serves, which is making a huge difference because she's not having to work as hard to hold on to her serve. But the second serve is still a weakness, and when she plays someone like a Serena, someone like Azarenka, that's where you'll see the vulnerabilities.
Any idea where Venus would rank in this?
So interestingly enough, Venus average of a first serve is high, but she has a huge discrepancy between her first and second serve. She can serve 112, 115 consistently, and then her second serve's in the 70s. So that has been her biggest, I think, criticism throughout the years, that there's a big discrepancy between her first and second serve. It's a weak second serve compared to how powerful, and she, I think, holds the record at 129 for the fastest serve ever hit.
Do the players get into some fun poking of each other when they look at the numbers to,
I think
Serena kidding around with her sister
I think they
Venus,
do. I think they'll look over at the
If
radar
she's
gun
anything
every
like
once
my
in a while.
older brother, I'm sure she does, right?
Yeah, everybody wants to have the fastest serve. They want to know
Yeah.
that they can belt it if they need to. But it's not all about speed. It's about placement. It's about when you hit what serve and against what opponent. And that's what SAP Analytics is bringing, I think, another level of insights to the WTA Tour. And that's why it's a great partnership. And I really think it's going to transform the game of tennis.
Yeah, great. That's great. Let's go back to Ashish and talk about scouting. So, you're just coming off the combines, gathering a lot of data about player prospects coming out of college, coming up on draft day, probably one of the most important days that you have within a season at a franchise. The tools I think that you use, taking this complex process of scouting and the different types of data that you have, share with me some of the things that the tool really needs to do, especially when you're looking at targeting certain players. In the process, I think you have a selection of guys that you would want to look at in a given draft. But what are some of the tools that you have in your scouting solution when people become available even at the professional level? And I know we've got some slides that will show up here on the waiver lists within scouting. Why don't you talk to that a little bit, Ashish?
Yeah, so definitely, as your draft is definitely the biggest day of the year for us in the NFL. You're spending millions of dollars to invest in these college athletes that are going to transition to pro, and you're trying to estimate how are they going to fit in your philosophy, how are they going to, grow as an athlete, running the correct routes, etc. And with the SAP scouting application, we can help narrow down the selection to comparing, obviously, what we saw earlier of what are these players in the past that we've used and how are they going to transition, to a pro. And then on the waiver wire, you can see that right away you log in and you're going to see all the players that are available to you coming from the nightly feed that we get. And at a glance, you can see right there and drill into the player, find out more details about them, and make your decision.
And then the next screen, I think, just gives you
That next
similar.
screen actually helps a lot. You can see right there how they rank compared to other NFL starters in the league. So that's what those different measurables are showing you based on their height, weight, speed, etc. Where do they rank compared to other NFL starters? So that can help narrow down that search when you're talking about 3,000 plus players, being available.
Sure.
Who are you going to get?
That's great. That's great. Okay, then let's move to Ken, NBA Stats.
Okay.
So, great website, tons of traffic, people going there, really enjoying the site personally myself. Where are you guys heading now? What's the next thing for NBA in statistics and technology?
So it's really going to be leveraging this player tracking data that we're collecting, and within all that information, we do need horsepower in order to drive it. That's where SAP HANA is, really assisting us in crunching that data in real time, loading the data into the data space in real time, and making that available. You can see here that we have the cameras in the arena and how they collect the data, and tracking every bit of the player movement. And then what we've been able to do is then process that within HANA and make it available on NBA.com for the fans to consume, both at the season level and within at the box score level as well. Right? So you could see not only your traditional box score statistics, but all these other things that we weren't able to glean before this data was available.
So every arena,
Every arena,
every team, the information's tracked, and then you're pushing back statistics that are non-box score related.
non-box score
Talk
things.
to this, yeah.
Yeah, certainly. You know, one of the rebound opportunities, right? It's not just how many rebounds does a player get that you've seen within a traditional box score, but how many of the available rebounds do they get? Is that telling the story of how effective they are on the glass? You know, or how many they may defer to a teammate? That's important as well. So, you know, it's not about gathering the rebound, but as long as the team gets it and starts the possession, that's what really, those are the game-changing type measurables that we have.
So average speed of the player during the game, distance traveled, they're traveling what, 2.5, 3 miles? What's
A bit
what are
more
you
than that,
seeing?
yeah. A bit more than that in the game. Well, you see that there. But what we look at that for is more around, I would say, the health of a player, injury
Right.
prevention. At what point does their speed start to slow down? Is it time, effectively timing out breaks for the coaching staff? That's what we're really going to look to leverage that information
Yeah,
for.
I got to believe the teams are looking at this for health, medical, injury prevention,
Exactly.
workouts, diet,
Yep,
everything,
exactly,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. Really, really great stuff.
So I did want to jump on one thing that you had asked Mary Jo before. Did the players use it against each other? So last year at our All-Star Weekend, Tony Allen's mother happened to see his shot chart, and it was littered with red. And she started smacking him right there at the podium, right in front of the thing.
Well, I've heard
funny scene.
I've heard another story in the NBA about players, ribbing each other. Where Dwayne Wade, who's 6'4", maybe, has the most number of blocks against someone that's above 6'9" or 6'10", and the player whose shot he blocked the most, who was above 6'10", was Dwight Howard. So apparently now they were getting into some jabbing on text and Twitters of kidding around with each other. Yeah. So, and I know in NBA that the players are using this data just as much as you'll find your data geeks in the NBA players that are all over this stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually sat with Chris Bosh down at our All-Star Weekend at our Technology Summit, and as we went through the information, it was eye-opening for him. And what was eye-opening for me was, as we went and showed the video of games from early November and mid-November, he remembers the situation, he remembers the game, he remembers the offense they were in, he remembers the defense they were in,
yeah.
and why things happen, and just to have that retention. You hear about Battier really being the guy on that team who's all about stats. Certainly Chris Bosh is second to no one,
Sure.
certainly with our interactions with him.
Right, that's great. Well, we've got some time here. You guys want to answer some questions from the audience? We've got some extra time. Anybody have any questions for our panelists? Yes?
So I was wondering about the SportView data. I was wondering what kind of potential it would have. I know it's brand new, so maybe in the upcoming years, what new insight it could bring to the game.
Insight it could bring to the game.
Yeah, the question was, how can the SportView data improve the game? Is that what your question was? If you want to ask it again?
Yes, that's correct.
Right. So you have to look at it from which lens you're looking at the data. From a broadcast perspective, the types of things we could do in-game, in broadcast. One of the earlier panels, they had spoken about measuring, a rookie kicker's heartbeat, where that would be at the big, kick at the end of the game. What would that be in our sport? During flurried action, on the free throw line, with 1/10 of a second left, shooting that free throw. Well, I'm sorry, that's other measurables, but the analytics, the movement, what point do players become fatigued and slow down? How far do they run? Looking at career distances, looking at best positions for certain situations like measuring spacing of all 5 players on the court, and how does that change on the offensive end and defensive end based on who you're playing? That's going to give coaching staffs and players sort of the edge up on that.
Yeah, I think I've seen the coaches are going to be using this a lot in the training on defenses. The beauty of the SportView system is that it allows you to measure the distance between an offensive player and a defensive player. So if you've got guys that are taking threes, the ability to transition from man-to-man or making switches and getting closer, as well as the spacing. On the offensive side, spacing out on the floor. We've seen that. I've seen that in other sports, especially in soccer or football. But soccer in Europe, we have a club in Germany that's currently using it on the practice field, where it's not the SportView system, but it's similar. They've got sensor technology to measure that spacing, and they actually train them and coach them on certain techniques on shadowing players in soccer, which is, I'm sure a lot of the guys in the NBA are teaching them techniques on spacing on the offensive side as well.
Measuring out closeout speed on three-pointers, right? That you can do that. Last year, one of the stories in the NBA Finals was, the Spurs collapsed their defense a bit down into the lane and sort of challenged Miami to shoot over the top of them. But we would have been able to see how that changed from their regular season through the playoffs and into the finals.
Right here, Carl.
Hi. One of the pitfalls of relying on analytics is a tendency, is confirmation bias or meta variable biases. So, do the leagues, the associations, or even SAP, do you have any, plan in place to account for these biases that may occur? Because, what may happen is, if I'm an analyst or a coach and I look at this stat and it says, for example, that, Serena's hitting from the center of a court, behind the baseline, then I might think that's the only thing that's accounting for her success, when there might be some other variables that are not accounted for, that are not captured, or that are not seen on those stats that are out there. So how do you account for that?
Well, I think there's many levels, of analysis and statistics that you have to look at. You can't just look at one little screen shot to say this is what's happening all the time. And that's why I think the fact that SAP can provide now the access to point-by-point analysis for the whole season gives you a much better idea and a more consistent idea of what Serena's doing. But of course, it's more than just where she's standing the majority of the time or where she's serving. I thought Ken brought up a good point about what happens when a player gets fatigued. What happens late in the third set with Serena Williams? Does she keep serving as hard to the same parts of the court? So there's just that extra level of detail that you're able to now access as a player, as a coach, as a broadcaster, and the fans are going to get more engaged because they're going to have access to it too. But you're right, you can't just focus on one little part, because that might not be the whole picture for the entire season.
But certainly telling a story or really emphasizing one facet of the game. You as an ex-coach, now using these tools to show them and demonstrate certain things. I think it'll be a great support system for coaches, but it's not, at the end of the day, they still need to execute.
Absolutely.
Right?
And one thing also is, now that the players are seeing their patterns and some of their strategies, they're altering what they do.
Yeah.
So Serena, since she was not aware that she was serving 98% of the time to the backhand on second serves, now she's mixing it up a little bit more. So now, it's a game. It's such a mental game when you play the opponents that know that this is your tendency, but now you know that that's your tendency, so you're going to incorporate a little bit of the opposite strategy. So it just evolves, and it makes the competition that much better. It makes the players themselves go to another level.
No.
I have a quick question about the availability of data. So, of course, and data is very valuable now. It's all over the place. And, of course, for some stuff, of course, you guys keep to your chest, but a lot of stuff is out there for fans to consume. And, especially with baseball and basketball, too, just all over the place. So I was just curious, as the big data advocates in your organizations, do you have any cool stories of times where maybe you saw something on a blog when someone just took some data they had online, found some really cool insights or some cool trends that you've actually advocated and implemented in your organizations? Or are most of the things that you're getting just from analysts within?
That's an interesting question.
For me, we get it mostly from within, but analyst to analyst, we do fight over who gets the specific, if it's a great stat. So sometimes we'll see something like, or we'll ask for stuff like the height over the net. If there's a flat player like Lena, how many inches over the net is she hitting? And then you compare it to a Serena, to a Sharapova, or someone who hits with a little bit more topspin. And then you see it and you're fascinated by it. You're like, okay, that's mine, don't take it. Every analyst wants to be the one that showcases that different sort of example. But usually we don't get it from social media. Usually we already have it in-house.
I assume, Oscar and Ken, at the league office, you have a lot of folks there that are focused on the data that you own. I mean, you're the league offices, you own that data, focused on innovation and delivering new things to players and coaches and fans, right?
Yeah, but we certainly do. We also do reach out to, and especially in baseball, there's a lot of fan websites, and we've created relationships and partnerships with them,
Right.
both on the business side and the technology side, and we sort of collaborate and start with some of these, advanced statistics, sabermetrics, leverage index, or UZR, war. That's become mainstream for us, and that's come from folks out there on their own, kind of coming up with those, whether it's the Bill Jameses of the world, obviously, or other folks. We collaborate with them actually quite a bit, so you'd be surprised how much of that comes inside, and we leverage it and create partnerships that way.
Yeah, I'm sorry, we answer hundreds of emails from fans about the site, about statistics, how they're used. We welcome that feedback from people, and it helps shape the site. It's anybody who's ever done a software development project knows there's the big circle, refine, and comes back to reinvent, right? And that's what we want. If it's our fans using our products, we want to hear what they have, and we want to deliver to them what they're looking for, and allow them to contribute and feel that influence on the product, because then they're going to feel more invested in it, use it more, evangelize it more for us.
I just wanted to ask about getting the organization to embrace a data-driven strategy. I mean, you always hear about coaches going with the hot hand or drafting the guy who they feel just be a general good fit. But so I was wondering if any of you have any thoughts on how to move your organization more towards a data-driven approach.
I'd say, going with SAP and this analytics system is our approach to transition that. Because you're right, a lot of coaches are old school in their philosophy, and they've coached players that they know, how they're going to be. And now this validates, are they right, or, should they look at more details into additional players? And I think this is the key for us is, having the old school philosophy transition to new real data that validates it.
Yeah, I think it's happening. I mean, when I go out and talk to teams, both in the U.S. and in Europe, these teams are hiring folks from outside the industry that are data scientists, that are ex-business consultants that can really understand on decision-making capabilities what to do with data. So finding those insights and having people that can do that to become a data-driven, a more of a data-driven company. I think that's happening today. I see that happening today.
Yeah, I know on our side, actually, we're being challenged by them to be data-driven. That's the demand, at least on the IT side, down to the club level, and they're coming up with the innovations a lot of the time, and challenging us to make it part of their business process.
But I still think you have, you mentioned the old school coaches that might, have their own style of coaching. And, I've talked to some NBA guys that, they have varying opinions of the value of analytics and technology. And I live in Philadelphia, and we had Doug Collins as a coach there a couple of years ago, and it was the topic was brought up to him about analytics, and he said, I don't use it. I'm not a big fan, whatever. And then you listen to his press conferences after a game, and they get the stat sheets from after the game, right after the game. And he is rattling off at the tip of his tongue every stat about that game just 5 minutes later. So, some of the coaches, I think they profess to be old school, but they certainly use the data to try to gain that competitive advantage when they're playing other teams. And I think I'm seeing that change happening within the last 2 to 3 years, where coaches are really relying on it. It might not be the head coach, but there's other coaches that are relying on that data to help them be more competitive. You got a gentleman in the back as well.
Following on your comment about Doug Collins, do you guys think that the use of analytics is going to change who becomes a coach and what types of people become coaches?
I think we can look in Miami, you know, Coach Palestra came from a video coordinator, worked himself up through the ranks. You know, he wasn't a player or any of that. He came right from the analytics team to one of the most successful coaches in our game today. So yes.
This is a question for Mary. What do you think is the one thing that hasn't been touched on with tennis analytics? I know a lot of people think it's behind, that we're going to see in the next 5 years come. I was reading that one stat that they're trying to start is forehands off first serve and how they can, you know, be aggressive from the first shot.
Excuse me, I think there's so many more levels that we can dig a little bit deeper, and a few that are already out there that we're trying to get our minds across we're used to break points. How many times do you save a break point? How many times do you convert on break point? We don't really look at how many times you win on your own serve when you have 40-30, or what happens on a big point, or at 30 love or love 30. So to see important moments that might not be the traditional, just the break point, I think is something that's quite important. Also, unforced errors. I have a tough time because it's sometimes a little bit too subjective of who's taking that stat of what an unforced error is, what a forced error is. So I think that is a stat that can be refined a bit. But there are so many different levels, like you said. I know that this year at the Australian Open, Maria Sharapova's coach, Sven Gronfeld, was looking to see how often Maria Sharapova got the return in play, the very first shot. He wanted to see in every return game, did she make 3 out of 4? Did she miss? How many did she miss? You think of Sharapova as one of the greatest returners in the game. When I heard that, I was like, let's take a deeper look. Let's see if this is true. And she actually goes for so many returns that she does make a lot of mistakes. So that's another angle to look at. Instead of first serve percentage, return percentage. How many balls in play are they making off first serves, off second serves? So there's definitely still a lot of room to go into. And SAP partnered with the WTA in August, and it's still a very new relationship. But like I said before, this is something that's going to transform tennis, and we're going to dig deeper. And as a broadcaster, I'm so excited because I'll be able hopefully to tell a better story and engage the fans that much more for a better understanding of what they're seeing on the court.
How do you measure consumer engagement for these data initiatives?
So for us, because it is public facing, we do have the traditional analytics as far as what you would get from your typical web measurement. I can say that year over year since we've launched this site, you know, our engagement and usage in our statistical sections is up 70%, you know, from prior to this product launching. You know, and we continue to listen. You know, that's the other thing is, as I said, we answer individually. We answer hundreds of emails a week from our fans, people who are contributing and asking questions. How do I do this? I'd love to see that. You know, and that's as valuable as any clickstream analytics we can collect to hear specifically what people are doing and how they're using the products.
I think, Oscar, the ones that you demonstrated were more internal applications, but you've got a website on MLB. You share a lot of information fan-facing.
Yeah, and that's our partner side on the advanced media, but you know, it's a constant relationship of going back and forth and process improvement. So even on our internal side, in the commissioner's office, I mean, we reach out to the clubs to find out what should we be looking at next, and finding out what's been effective, what hasn't been effective. You know, for all the successes we have a ton of failures too that we learn from, and we work with them to figure out what should be the next priority.
I think with social media tools today, you're going to know pretty quickly whether or not an application, a fan-facing application that you're putting out there is successful or not successful. So I know that the NBA stats page has been very, very successful just based on feedback and, you know, not to mention the increased traffic, but what you hear on social media and the sentiment of the applications. Someone else here had a question?
A lot of the analytics we're looking at here is game day analytics. How are teams currently using training data, health data, to predict, for instance, whether David Ortiz is going to have a good day at the plate, and hence, should he be picked on the team?
Yeah, so that's become, for us, obviously a bigger and bigger focus is leveraging that health data to make decisions. And whether they be, on a league-wide level, I can speak to that a little bit more. Recently, a couple of seasons ago, we implemented a new 7-day disable list for concussions. So that came out of, we had some steering committees and medical steering committees, but leveraging some of the injury analytics that we provided in our tool and looking league-wide and what was really the right treatment and what came out of analyzing that data was, a 30-day DL, 15-day DL did not suffice for a number of reasons. So that's a place where it's changing, that health data is really changing the way we're managing the game.
I've seen a lot of teams trying to take all of the data they have on the sports operations side and consolidate it into a common platform so you can look at and compare and correlate information on performance data with health and medical and training. There's a number of clubs that I know in all of the professional sports in the US certainly that are looking at doing that. And they can look at things like hydration levels and workout schedules and diet and really start to understand, hey, how can we affect performance of a player by looking at this data and really correlating the data and making decisions out of it. Someone here had a question.
Thank you. So we've talked about team and player performance. Are they linked, if at all, to revenue growth and fan engagement as well? Like the data that's generated within a player's profile, is that linked to maybe fans are more engaged if you have somebody hits more home runs, just a very basic stat, but so is there a linkage between revenue growth and fan engagement?
Yeah, anybody want to? Thoughts?
So, outside of my area a little bit, I'll say this, a winning product on the court certainly helps the bottom line, right? And I guess that would be true across the board. So yeah, so if there's ways for coaches and front offices to assemble better teams, for players to perform a bit better, to stay on the court a little bit more, it's going to, again, improve their product on the field, court, ice, wherever, and lead to more engaged fans, more ticket sales, more products.
Yeah, I think it's all connected. I mean, it starts with a winning team and putting the best product on the floor or on the field. That'll drive interest, that'll drive revenue, that'll drive increased fan engagement, but I think it's all intertwined. We have time for one more question. And here, Carl.
So, Zon, yeah, a lot of your questions about the players and the teams. What about the environment? 3 of your sports are played outdoors. How does that influence the usage and the utility of the analytics? And unfortunately, your sport's played indoors, but they've tried playing basketball games outdoors. So how do things like that, like things that obviously you have zero control over, influence your usage and utility of the analytics?
So on the baseball side, obviously, we've embedded that in our analytics. So, when you're looking at stats, you start looking at it, we call them splits, and it's splits that are based on the environmental side of things. Obviously the basics, day, night, weather conditions, but we're looking at the overall conditions of the game, and I'm sure we'll especially look at it this season, beginning of the season. I'm feeling it's going to be cold. So just looking at it one way. So we try to marry it with the rest of the statistics to provide other slices of that same data and layer it on top of it. So it's certainly something I think that, as we're looking at new biometrics and things like that, and how do we tie that together, that's again the new frontier, right? So we've been doing it on the basic environmental layer and layering it on top, but I think there's a lot more to be done.
I'd say for football, we, obviously field condition, weather matters a lot, right? So it's what players are in the regions that have played in those conditions, that will fit, the DC metro area, our weather pattern, and what field that we have and utilize. So we look at that goes into the scouting reports. So as the scouts are going out evaluating different players, they're putting that in their reports of, what type of player are they, what type of weather can they handle. Like everyone says, Peyton Manning, has struggles in the cold weather. Watch them put on gloves. So it's things like that that definitely factor in when you're selecting the player.
Tennis looks at it as well. I mean, weather plays a big part of it. We play inside and outside, but if any of you guys watched the Australian Open, you saw that we had extreme heat conditions. They were playing at 110 degrees air temperature, which probably was another extra 20, 25 degrees on the court, and it makes it quicker. The height of the bounce is different when it's that hot. It'll bounce higher, and some players, you know, like you said, they prefer to play in those types of conditions and want the ball bouncing higher. Some players like the colder when it's heavier and it doesn't bounce up as high, and they generate their own pace. So weather is something that we definitely look at it in analytics to see, and we can show it on graphs of where people are striking the ball and how high it's bouncing and how much faster or slower, depending on what it is.
Ken, I don't think you have to answer this one.
Well, I mean, I could say we go to great
You
lengths
look at other factors.
to pull those variables out, right? You know, so that we have maintained consistent temperatures across the arenas, consistent court surfaces, and all of that. We try and mitigate those, right? Because we can control the environment.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. I want to thank our panelists. Give them a round of applause. So all of the folks that are up here today are customers of SAP. We've got a booth right outside this conference room here. If you want to stop by, we've got a demonstration happening on the SAP scouting solution that's used by the Redskins. So feel free to stop by and get some more information. Thank you, everybody.